Joannides didn't just have knowledge of Oswald before the assassination. Afterward, he, the same man, George Joannides, the man with the fake ID that was connected to Oswald, played a central role in deceiving the House Select Committee on Assassinations. At the time, get this, the CIA appointed Joannides to be its liaison with the committee. But he and the agency hid the fact that he was involved with the DRE, and therefore, the Kennedy case slow-walked the CIA's production of records and lied. Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess Cannell, and if you're new, then welcome. I hope to earn your subscription today in this video. What we're going to do is go through a recent article by Axios. It is from July 5th, so it's not up to the minute, but what I hope to do in this video is give you a good look at the current issue that this week, this month is coming out through Congress and through the document drops that we're getting from the CIA. This is the first time that pressure has been put on the CIA since the 2017 pause that was given. In 2017, in the 90s, there were provisions made that all the documents were going to be released by 2017. And all the researchers had been waiting for that time. Well, in 2017, Trump permitted a delay on some of the documents. He made some provisions that, if certain provisions were met, that those documents could be withheld, and of course many were. Since that time, the CIA, my understanding, has not released a single document. Even once other documents were released I think there were a few in 2019, and then more last in the spring. But now we're getting the first documents. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you, this is one of the documents I printed out that was released, and we're going to be talking about this. It's a memorandum. So here's the headline from Axios. It says, CIA admits shadowy officer monitored Oswald before the JFK assassination, new records reveal. This article is by Mark Caputo. They, of course, have a photo of Lee Harvey Oswald passing out documents. Now, one of the interesting things, when you start to lean in even just a little bit, you start to look at the person of Lee Harvey Oswald, and he makes less and less sense. How did he have the money to travel to Europe, for example, before he went into the Soviet Union? How did he have money to stay in ritzy hotels before he went into Russia? How did he have money to go to ritzy officers' clubs in Japan and keep mistresses when he was just on Marine pay? How did he have the capacity to be someone who went from being poor and unimportant and disconnected to being someone about whom photos were taken, and he was put on a radio interview for a debate and treated like a little minor celebrity, and then all of a sudden he's reestablished in a totally new place. He's traveling, he's given jobs, he has jobs that are deep state connected with FBI and so on. So the more you look at Lee Harvey Oswald, he makes no sense. And honestly, I don't like calling him Lee Harvey Oswald. We do that with all assassins. We give them 3 names. His name was Lee Oswald. Most people knew him as Lee. So I will try, when I'm speaking of him, to call him Lee or Lee Oswald, because the only reason we know his middle name is because that's what they do with assassins. They give us the full third name a lot of the time. So anyway, this article says, Lee Harvey Oswald, this is the caption to that photo. It says, Lee Harvey Oswald distributes hands-off Cuba flyers in New Orleans. This photograph was used in the Kennedy assassination investigation. A newly released CIA document indicates an agent ran an operation that came into contact with Oswald before he was accused of assassinating President Kennedy in 1963. The article goes on. For the first time since President Kennedy's assassination nearly 62 years ago, the CIA has tacitly admitted that an officer specializing in psychological warfare ran an operation that came into contact with Lee Harvey Oswald before the Dallas killing. Why it matters. The disclosure on Thursday, nestled in a batch of 40 documents concerning Officer George Joannides, indicates the CIA lied for decades about his role in the Kennedy case before and after the assassination, according to experts on JFK's slaying. The linchpin document is this one. It is a January 17th, 1963 CIA memo showing that Joannides was directed. So here is the name subject. George Joannides. It gives his identification number. It says you are requested to obtain an alias driver's permit for the captioned subject. Subject is identified as follows: Howard Mark Gebler. And it gave fake information. Subject has a valid true name, gives his true Virginia license, which bears the expiration date 31 July 1965. So this is the one of the smoking gun documents that says George Joannides is Howard Mark Gebler. Now, why is that a problem? Let's keep reading. Until Thursday, the agency had denied that Joannides was known as Howard, the case officer name for the CIA contact who worked with activists from an anti-communist group opposed to Cuban dictator Fidel Castro called the Cuban Student Directorate. For decades, the agency also falsely said it had nothing to do with that student group, which was instrumental in having Oswald's pro-Castro stances published soon after the shooting. So this group, this student group, Cuban Student Directorate, the American public was being presented with information from that student group. It was instrumental in presenting the view that the American public was fed soon after the assassination, that Oswald is pro-Castro. That student group was being used as an authority or as a vehicle to present a false view of Oswald. The bottom line, says Jefferson Morley, who I mentioned recently, and you should follow him. You should follow him on Twitter. He has a Substack, and on YouTube, he's regularly being interviewed right now, this week. So look for his interviews. The bottom line, says Jefferson Morley, the cover story for Joannides is officially dead. This is a big deal. The CIA is changing its tune on Lee Harvey Oswald. The information comes to light as part of President Trump's order that the government meet its obligations to disclose all documents under the JFK Records Act of 1992. You may remember, we've talked about this on this channel, that there was an early push for information once the Zapruder film was released. And that happened in 1975 and led to some of the congressional investigations in the late 70s. In 1991, the JFK movie came out, and immediately there was an outcry. There was a remembering of the American people, and that led to the 1992 Records Act that, hey, you guys have to release these documents in a timely way. You cannot just hold on to them until the end of time. This is absurd. And so they set some dates, which 2017 was meant to be a big answer to that. Little was known of Joannides' involvement in the case until disclosures in 1998 under the Records Act. New disclosures of previously hidden records keep adding slices of information to the story. Now, we're told we're going to zoom in on this figure of George Joannides. Joannides was the deputy chief of the CIA's Miami branch, overseeing all aspects of political action and psychological warfare. That included covertly funding and directing the Cuban student group, commonly referred to as DRE, for its Spanish language initials. On August 9th, 1963, more than 3 months before the November 22nd assassination, before DRE operatives got into a scuffle with Oswald. In New Orleans, when he was passing out pro-Castro Fair Play for Cuba Committee pamphlets. The subsequent court hearing was covered by local news media. Here is where, of course, Robert Groden again saves the day. These photos that I'm about to show you are from this book. It's called The Search for Lee Harvey Oswald by Robert Groden. It has an introduction by the great Cyril Wecht. Now, first, what I wanted to tell you is that this is the book that Robert and Janet have indicated the publisher has not reprinted, and that actually someone purchased all of the copies, and so it's very hard to find. I happened to find one on eBay, but he still has 2 copies that he's able to sell. So if anybody's interested, I will put a link in the show notes. If not, you're going to need to go to eBay or wherever you can to try to get a copy. But apparently they are hard to get your hands on, and I happened to find a little lot of books in which this was one of them. But here on this page, it says under arrest, and we get some photos. Here we get Lee on Canal Street on August 9th, and he is wearing a placard that states Viva Fidel. Then here he's complaining to the police about some of these men from the group came up and approached him, and they actually smiled and had weird interactions beforehand. Carlos threatens to hit him. He says, "Okay, Carlos, if you want to hit me, hit me." And so there's this perception that it's a staged fight. You can look into it yourself and decide what you think, but this is the sort of thing that they were doing to try to get attention. And so sure enough, it did. There's photos of it, which ask yourself, why are there photos at this time of a street fight? Who would be doing that? What's the purpose of even having those photos at all? And then we have photos of his arrest here in the police station. It shows his height. We get some photos that are 3 months before the assassination of JFK, accurate photos of Oswald. Later, he appears again. And here, a week later, he's handing out the Fair Play for Cuba handbill. That's that famous photo there. So Robert gives us plenty of information, lots of childhood in this book, and of course, lots of photographic evidence of the actual assassination and things regarding Oswald. So if you're interested in this book, I'll put the link in the show notes for you. But that is the picture that's being given to us of what August 9th looked like. On August 21st, 1963, so think about this. August 9th, he is in a scuffle that just happens to have photos taken of it. He's arrested. There's a splash made. August 16th, he's passing out these handbills. August 21st, he debated DRE activists on local TV. I've never heard of such attention for a poor, frustrated loser with no prospects who's just a lone nut. This is a lot of airtime and a lot of media attention for someone like this. It says it provided more media attention to him as a communist. He got to expound upon his views on what communism even meant. After the assassination, DRE's newsletter identified Oswald as a pro-Castro communist, and the Miami Herald and Washington Post covered the story. What I want to do by looking at these things is just encourage you guys to think through a concept called sheep dipping. The idea of sheep dipping is this. For a period of time, you are removed from your normal goings on, and you are put into a situation where you look different than what you actually are. You take on some covert identity and undergo enough items in your life to where you look authentic as that thing. So, for example, I have never gone, what is that thing where you do the roller skates and then you go roller derby. I have never done roller derby, but if I was going to be sheep dipped as a roller derby enthusiast, well, I would need to own some skates. I would probably need some little electric colored shorts and high, socks. And I would need to, for some period of time, maybe several months, be spending my free time as a roller derby participant and enthusiast. And if I did that enough, and if I got some media attention somehow, or took plenty of social media photos and put some things up, maybe even mentioned some things on this channel about my roller derby successes, then eventually people would be able to look at me. Let's say there's some reason for me to be seen as a roller derby enthusiast. Maybe there's going to be some thing that happens in a roller derby tournament and they need me to appear legitimate as that kind of person. Well, they could preempt that by a few months. If I'm an intelligence asset, sheep dipping would be me going in, pretending for 3 to 6 months that I'm some big roller derby person. And then when I give a quote or when I am involved in a particular activity, I look legitimate. I look like I'm a real deal roller derby lady, when just a moment ago I couldn't even remember the term. That is what sheep dipping is. And so Oswald comes from a situation where he's been in Russia, he's been hanging out, then they're hanging out in Dallas. He doesn't get any airtime in Dallas. In fact, he's making contacts with wealthy white Russians. We're told that he and Michael Payne were attending extremist political meetings on both sides of the aisle. So right-wing extremists, left-wing extremists. They're just attending extremist political meetings because that's a mutual shared interest that they have. So they're doing that in Dallas. And then all of a sudden, Lee is in the late summer of 1963 in New Orleans and having every week over week a different media experience that puts him as a pro-Castro person. I and many others believe that this is the practice of sheep dipping. The final thing that they want us to do in this zoom out section is they said a year before Oswald became known as pro-Castro, the Pentagon had actually formulated a plan called Operation Northwoods to stage a false flag attack in the United States, blame Cuba, and then attack it. If you don't know, a false flag attack is when there is some perceived attack on the mainland or something that represents the homeland that is not true, that has actually been done by our own government for the purpose of being able to blame someone else. So there was a plan called Operation Northwoods. You can look it up. It's true. All of these things are true bullet points from this article in Axios. Now we're going to zoom back out. The new documents don't shed any additional light on Kennedy's shooting or settle the controversy over whether Oswald acted alone, nor is there any evidence showing why the CIA covered up Joannides' ties to DRE. All the records disclosed so far show how the CIA lied about financing or being involved with DRE. That includes the agency's interactions with the Warren Commission in 1964, the Church Committee in 1975, the House Select Committee on Assassinations in 77 and 78, and the Assassination Review Board until 1998. The intrigue here is this. Okay, so we're going to take all of what we've just said and then boil it down to some really crazy things, you guys. Joannides didn't just have knowledge of Oswald before the assassination. Afterward, the same man, George Joannides, the man with the fake ID that was connected to Oswald, played a central role in deceiving the House Select Committee on Assassinations. At the time, get this, the CIA appointed Joannides to be its liaison with the committee. The man with the fake ID, the man who was keeping tabs on this group, the DRE, and that was part of the sheep dipping operation, I believe, with Oswald. The CIA appointed Joannides to be its liaison with the committee, the House Select Committee on Assassinations. But he and the agency hid the fact that he was involved with the DRE, and therefore the Kennedy case slow-walked the CIA's production of records and lied. The committee's chief counsel, Robert Blakey, testified in 2014 that he asked Joannides about Howard and about DRE, and that, quote, Joannides assured me that they could find no record of any such officer assigned to DRE, but that he would keep looking, Blakey said. Now, I will say that because I happen to know Robert Groden, I can tell you this. He has told me a couple of times at this point that Robert Blakey, he worked closely with Robert Blakey on these committees, and he tried to urge Blakey, they are snowing you, they are hiding documents, they are keeping things from you. And that Blakey's response was, I've worked with these people for 10, 15, 20 years. You really think they would lie to me? Later, Blakey did admit that they had lied to him. But at the time of the committee, he believed them when he said, I've asked for documents about Howard and DRE. Picture Robert Groden there saying, hey, you can't rely on what they're saying. Ask more questions, and him saying, you really think they'd lie to me? I've known these guys for a really long time. A former committee investigator, Dan Hardaway, testified before a House Oversight Committee last month that Joannides was running a, quote, covert operation to undermine the congressional probe into the assassination. Get this also, 2 years after stonewalling the committee. So remember, this is Bob Groden and Robert Blakey back in the late 70s. We're talking about before I was alive. All of the things that I was just describing. Him asking for the information, Joannides stonewalling, Groden saying, they're keeping stuff from you. Him saying, you really think they'd lie to me? All of that happened before I was even born. When I was 2. 2 years after stonewalling the committee, Joannides was awarded the Career Intelligence Medal by the CIA in 1981. He died in 1990. So for his wonderful work of giving media accolades that showed Oswald as a pro-Castroite, for his committee work of hiding successfully the intelligence connection with Oswald, and for whatever else he did for the CIA, he was awarded the Career Intelligence Medal just 2 years after having hidden that connection. What they're saying now, Representative Anna Paulina Luna, she is the Florida Republican Congresswoman who has been driving this investigation. So I'm so grateful for her work. She has been pretty tireless, and it's interesting. I have a little bit of shared kinship with her in that she is a latecomer to this investigation. She is young. I feel very similar. And what I see her doing is leaning on people who are experts to even know what to ask for. I believe her investigation into this and her pressing for the Joannides documents is because of researchers who have shared with her that that's important. It's not like she has time to go be researching all the time, but she's leaned in to researchers and been able to obtain some of these documents. This Florida Republican overseeing the House committee that's examining the newly released JFK documents said, quote, Joannides was 1,000%, end quote, involved in a CIA cover-up. So she's absolutely saying yes. Joannides was at the centerpiece of the CIA cover-up in that committee time. Morley and some others who have written extensively about Kennedy's assassination believe rogue CIA agents might have been involved in the killing. but Morley is not ready to say Joannides was one of them. So that's an important distinction that we've been talking about lately on the channel, is we want to go as far as the evidence shows. We want to follow the truth wherever it leads. We don't want to take something and springboard that because that's true, this other thing has to be true. And what I see here is Jefferson Morley saying, okay, what this says is that Joannides was monitoring him. He was potentially involved in participating with the DRE to give media cover, and he was involved in the CIA cover-up after the fact. But it doesn't mean that Morley was a part of planning the Kennedy assassination. We don't want to make that leap. We want to be careful about the assumptions that we are making. Others, such as author Gerald Posner, believe that Oswald was the lone gunman, but all are in agreement that the CIA acted in bad faith after Kennedy was killed. Posner said this, quote, "It's vintage CIA. They never provide transparency. They don't tell the truth. They obscure, they obfuscate. And when documents come out, they look bad." A CIA spokesperson told Axios, the agency, quote, "has fully complied and provided all documents without redactions related to the assassination of former President John F. Kennedy to NARA, consistent with President Trump's direction in an unprecedented act of transparency by the agency." So they're saying we are doing an unprecedentedly good thing. We are going along and fully complying. So they are singing their own high praise. So what's next? We are told, this was a week ago, Morley and Luna say CIA Director John Ratcliffe and National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard deserve credit for demanding more transparency. So expect more records. Yes, this was from July 5th, 2025. There have been more things being analyzed since this point, but I wanted to give you guys this little look. If you have been following this or seeing the name George Joannides and you don't know where he fits, that is where he fits. He was CIA. He was keeping tabs on Oswald. He was working with activists from this anti-communist group called the DRE. And then he was the CIA contact for the House Select Committee on Assassinations and obfuscated and kept documents. For 45 years, we didn't know these things. For 45 years, these things have been hidden. And now the CIA is like, oh, we've been so transparent. We have fully complied. That is what's going on with George Joannides. Let me know in the comments what you learned, what you know. If you've been following even more recent document analysis since this point from Jefferson Morley and others, drop that information in the comments. If there's things that can help others and be pebbles that lead people toward the truth, I would appreciate those being dropped in the comments, or share what you know. Share your comments and your questions. I'd love to hear from you in the comments, and we'll see you soon. Have a great day. Bye.